going to keep them down on the farm after they've seen the lights of Broadway? Well, that's the way it used to be. But lately, it seems that the bright lights, noise, and chaotic environment of big city life is driving people back to the country for the first time in history. In our story, we talk to Gene Sampson, who runs the House on the Hill, an art gallery displaying the work of local artists as well as his own, and to Mike and Donna Susnick, who operate the Bear River Farmers Museum, a collection of artifacts from the past life of the town.
Tis the gift to be simple, tis the gift to be free, tis the gift to come down where we ought to be. And when we are in the place just right, we'll be in the valley of love and delight. When true simplicity is gained, to bow and to bend, we will not be ashamed. To turn, will be our delight, till by turning, we come round.
Well, I think in the country, you're more affected by the seasons and the type of the spring, summer, fall, winter. You wake up each morning and you go out to see what kind of a day it is this morning, you know. When I was living in the city, I didn't do that too often. I was wondering what I had to do today and whether I'd get there on time. But the exuberant side of the country is, I think, probably the friends that you develop. You make closer contacts with people, I believe.
And every time I see a sunset, it just blows my mind. And you can walk out at night and just see the heavens and be really close to them. In New York, you're lucky if you see the moon and possibly Venus.
How do you, as a native, react to the influx of people from city centers moving in around the community?
Well, perhaps we don't want to see too much of this because it could destroy what we have here and the beauty and the environment that we are able to enjoy. We like it just the way it is, and we don't want to see any vast changes, of course, but we can appreciate that other people like to enjoy some of the things that we do also. That's probably the way I think of it. Other people may have different views, I don't know.
In the 30s, as I can remember the best of any, the Lincoln Pulp Company was here in Bear River. Their main place was Bangor, Maine, main office, Bangor, Maine. And you see, there was thousands of cords of pulpwood shipped out of here every year. In those days, the river was kept open with dredges. There were some quite large boats used to load and haul out of here. And even up as late as 1945, when I got out of the Navy, the first day I come home, there was 5 ships loading in Bear River then, which looks unrealistic today when you don't see anything here.
Tell me, Michael, what motivated you to set up the Farmers Museum?
Well, I think the basic reason was one of acceptance. I was a newcomer in the area, and I really wanted to get the people to know me and to like me. And there were other reasons, of course. There is a library facility in Digby, which is about 12 miles from here, but they really have a limited selection, and it's also quite a chore for people to go into Digby, especially in the winter. And I had the opportunity to get all these books from a library in New York, and as a matter of fact, many of them were destined to be burned. I picked them up and I brought them up here, and I had support from local legislators. Originally, it was to be a community-supported project, whereby I had asked people to donate their time or labor to help construct bookshelves, or to help clean up the building. And the books would have been supplied, and I would have put in time as a volunteer librarian. We did have some story hours a few summers ago, and there have been some children coming in to borrow the books. But by and large, it really hasn't been that well accepted.
The younger people that have been moving in, have they had any effect on the community in any way, or have they just sort of dissolved into the community, or
Well, that's very
are
hard.
they still on the outside?
No, it's hard to say. They have a lot of friends around town. You see them talking to people. People seem to know them.
How about drawbacks living out here? Have you confronted any great crises, or are there things about the people here or the environment that really bother you that you haven't been able quite to cope with?
Well,
Yes, there is one thing, and I imagine this is true in any small town. Gossip and rumors are something that I'm finding very difficult to deal with. When you live in the city, or even in the suburbs, you don't get this to any large degree. But here, it seems to be the nature of the town, and it's very difficult for us to deal with it, because no one goes unscathed. Everybody is affected by it. And at first, we took everything we heard very literally, and we've learned a lot of lessons about rumors, and we try to ignore them for the most part now. But
Do you think rumors are a rural phenomenon or a Nova Scotian phenomenon?
small town phenomenon, not necessarily Nova Scotian, but small town.
Do you draw on the environment for your paintings? Mostly you paint your landscapes? Or?
Well, the thing that stimulates me in painting is the visual world around me, and the sights that I see, and the sounds, and the colors, and so forth. You have that anywhere you go, but what's around me now is more comfortable to my nature than the city. Whenever I leave and go to Halifax for a few days, I'm very stimulated by the city. I get a little bit hyped up, and you find it. It's quite nice, you know. It's a different kind of a world.
Tell me about some of the people who have work in your gallery.
Well, there are about 6 different other artists, and they're all from the area. That particular one you're looking at was done by a friend of mine who teaches music instrument making, a fellow I studied with years ago. The one next to him behind you there is a fellow who lives out in Marshalltown, named Jeff Butler. He studied in Halifax.
He's got quite a few here.
Yeah, he's quite a painter. I really enjoy his things.
The shapes, human shapes, seem amorphous. They seem, bulky. I don't know if amorphous is the right.
They kind of blend in with everything around them. He usually makes the figures work in well with the whole thing, the total concept of the painting.
Do you feel there's been, perhaps among some of the people in the community, a bit of resentment for aliens moving in?
I would probably have to answer that there might be some resentment or some feelings. Perhaps people not understanding motives or reasons for others coming in. Perhaps that's part of the answer. I'm not sure. If people could get together on this and more activities together, perhaps some of this could be helped.
How do you feel personally about this?
If people are coming into the area to enjoy what we have here and our beauty and our environment and the type of life that we have, why, I can't see anything wrong with that, as long as we're not outnumbered to such a great degree that we're crowded, I should say.
There have been all kinds of rumors afoot that I had gotten all sorts of government grants and that I was either very rich or very eccentric. Well, the fact is I'm not very rich, and I don't think I'm crazy, am I?
Maybe a bit eccentric.
The library functioned for about 2 years, and then as a natural outgrowth of the library, I felt that a museum, especially in this area where the lifestyle, of course, that was prevalent in Bear River at the turn of the century, as it was the case in many small towns, has rapidly disappeared. And there are artifacts that portray some of what life was about in those years. Many of those artifacts were found in the dump. Many were found in attics or cellars, and some, of course, at many auctions and antique shops. And I felt if I could get them all together under one roof, it would, first of all, be educational. It would aid people or help people to reminisce. And I felt that it would be a rather good thing for not only the local community, but the area as well.
It's home. I like it very much. I feel very comfortable here.
So there's nowhere else you'd rather be?
No.
How about when you lived in New York? How does this compare with New York?
There's no comparison. It's a different world. There are more people in New York. I mean, just the numbers has something to do with the particular atmosphere or structure of the place, the numbers of people.
Did you have immediate neighbors in New York that you were friendly with?
Most unusual. I lived in an apartment building for, I think it was six or 7 months, and I had never seen, all the time that I was there, I never saw anybody go in or out of that apartment building. And I knew there were other people that lived there, but I just never seen them.
Did you hear them?
Somebody opened and closed their door in the hall once.
Oh boy. Well, we came to Nova Scotia just a little over a year ago, and before that we were coming just summers, kind of summers and Christmas time and Easter time. But we finally made the move about, it'll be a year, a little over a year now.
You're quite far out in the country here. Does the isolation bother you at all?
No, not really. We're not as isolated as we thought when we first came here. There was a big contrast between city or suburban living and living here, and our first impression was we were back in the woods. But living here for a full year and becoming familiar with the town doesn't make us seem that isolated anymore.
Well, no, it's interesting that in New York, before we got up here, we'd tell friends, and of course relatives knew that we were coming up. Nova Scotia, my God, it's like, it's the end of the world. It's the North Pole, you know. But people have been really surprised. The climate isn't, it's not a tundra-type climate, as people would have themselves believe.
Oh, well, in those days, everybody had to work where everybody was farming. There was all kinds of chores to do. Because nobody was burning oil, everybody had firewood to carry in, to cut, haul. You had gardens to weed, you had cattle to look after. Well, none of this exists today, only at a very small scale. So there isn't anything for anybody, well, like a teenager left to do as far as chores and stuff goes.
Recently, there's been an influx of people from other parts of Canada and the U.S. into this area. Has that seemed to make any impressionable difference on this area?
Oh, yes. I mean, when they first come, you must remember their dress was much different. With the long hair and the beards and stuff, which soon caught on around here. But I don't think anybody frowned on it too much, maybe at first. But sure, you see a few of them in town, you go there. But as far as it goes, I think they only want to spend the summer months, the bulk of them, and they take off for homes for the winter months.
What did your family think of you?
Oh, wow, that was really good.
They never thought we would make it. They were convinced we'd come back after a year.
Have they been up here?
Oh, yes.
What do they think of it?
Well, until a year ago, we had no improvements, and they found it very strange that we could be comfortable here using a hand pump and using an outhouse.
Well, in those days, when you went away from electricity and inside plumbing, stuff like that, you didn't know any better. But today, when you know better and you slip back in time to this stuff, it must be quite a setback. For a lot of these kids are coming from good families and from good homes and is used to it.
Now, with the improvements, they seem to see that to them we're becoming more civilized in their terms. And I think they're beginning to appreciate the fact that we're going to stay here and that we do enjoy it.
As you might say, old Grandma and Grandma knew a little bit better. They moved out of these areas that those kids are in now and left them. Now they're taken back. Otherwise, if it wasn't for them places wouldn't have any people living there today. So I suppose as I was a kid growing up, having my cousins and different ones who now come down from the New England States bragging about what they had there, which was seemed to us at that time was quite a loss for us, but when you look at it today, the things that they had then we're very fortunate never to have, because when you start reading about pollution, stuff like that, which never exists here as yet, today when we start getting these things, we know how to put in there to control it through the mistakes of other people.
For a long time, every new experience that I got involved in, whether it was felling a tree or whether it was just simply going out and feeding the animals, I just always made a mental note of it. There was just something about getting involved in something like that that made me say, wow, Mike Sesnick, I'm really getting into it. City guy, I'm really getting out and feeding those chickens.
There are a lot of things we had to learn to do. We had to learn to split wood, and I put in my first garden this year. And we've made a lot of mistakes, but the feeling that I got from the garden was so magnificent. It's an experience I'd never had before.
It's interesting that there are 2 points of view, having lived in the city and then spending some time in the suburbs. I found that when I relate life experiences up here to my suburban neighbor, it's a whole different trip as relating it to a friend in the same area. The suburban neighbor kind of, I think, regards our whole existence as somewhat a threat to his particular lifestyle.
That's not the neighbor here?
No, not here. The neighbors in the city, in New York.
Mm-hmm. They regard you being here as somewhat of a
threat to their own lifestyle.
Particularly our neighbors in the suburbs. To them, the suburbs is the ultimate. They've moved out of the city. They've moved to the country, and to them, this is the final step. And when we began showing our discontent for the suburbs, after a few years, they couldn't really understand it, and we began talking about Nova Scotian moving out to rural areas.
And they
said, you must be crazy, why? You have everything here.
And, all the creature comforts. Right. What more could a person want?
It took a certain transition. I mean, changing from one lifestyle to another took about, I noticed it over a period of 2 years, actually.
Really?
I kind of looked at myself to see what was going on, and there's a transitional period. It takes a while. It's like you can't go from one thing to another that rapidly. I mean, the trip is short, but the time acclimatizing yourself to it takes a little while.
So how
not
about,
that it's a pleasant experience. It's not painful at all.
how about if you went back? Could you go back under any circumstances? Say you were acclaimed now as an artist, and no, I mean seriously.
Why? Look around.
There's such a variety to nature in its patterns and in its proliferations. And the same with trees. Every tree is different, has its own individual personality, if you will, or structure that, denotes it from any other tree. From the beginning, when a child is able to perceive things visually, he starts looking at things very intensely. He'll look at patterns in a material or in the ground, if he's sitting out in the grass. And these textures and patterns are fascinating to the child. Of course, it's a whole new world for him. He continues to experience this, I guess, up until his teens. And at that point, somewhere, it's lost, and he no longer has the sense of wonder that these images, the visual world, gives to him. After that, he's reminded of it from time to time. The perennial spring day is one thing where you see the new leaves rustling in the wind against the sky, stark trees against a background of patterns that the branches form after the leaves have fallen. Reflections in water is things that we see quite commonly and we're familiar with. But underneath that, there's an overall pattern that sort of pervades everything, except that we don't see it. We've lost that way of perceiving as when we were a child. And I think it's kind of ideal to get back to seeing in the way a child does, being able to perceive the patterns that are there anyway, that our mind starts looking at things instead of our sensitivity and our being. When you start seeing things with your mind, you cloud the issue a bit. What a child sees is very initial, very pure. It's right there. And what an adult sees is quite different. A man walking down a country lane or for a quiet walk alone in the woods might be walking a little bit too quickly. I think the pace of the society is moving such now that we move quickly that we often miss very much. And by stopping to look, by having no worries on the mind, you can see a little bit clearer when the mind doesn't cloud the image, the initial perception that you're looking at.
Yeah, at one point I had this notion that I was going to make, or we were going to make, we have discussed this quite often, to make kind of a radical change of lifestyle. But we realized that you are what you learn as a child. There's no question of it. And to have spent 30 years in the kind of environment that preaches certain ideals and inculcates certain values, you try to break away because you realize that, there are problems, there are disadvantages to that kind of a life, but I find that you cannot break away entirely.
Take me back to the place where I first saw the light, to the land that I love. Take me home, where the wild birds sing me to sleep every night. Oh, why was I tempted to roam? me back to the place where I first